deity worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is his last and final messenger. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, or as we like to say with Arabic, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So where do we begin with this? I want to actually share a little story. One of the things that I also do is that I'm a counselor for the website aboutislam.net. I'm one of their online counselors. And a few months ago, I got a really interesting question. And that question was from a 21-year-old college student studying psychology in Pakistan. And she had emailed in with a question, and she basically said, I'm 21 years old, I'm studying psychology, and I just learned for the first time that Muslims have sex. And she said, I'm really upset, I'm shocked, I feel like I don't know anything. She said, my whole life I was told this is something only non-Muslims do. And now I find out that this is something that Muslims do, and I don't really know what to do, and I feel like, am I going to become a bad person now that I know this information? Am I going to start having bad thoughts? Her whole world had just sort of been ripped apart. And I felt so sad for her on the one hand, and I thought to myself, how is it that someone's 21 years old and has this belief system? Now, perhaps we could find the hidden blessings in that, and that also means that, mashallah, there's a whole lot of other stuff that she hasn't been exposed to, alhamdulillah. But certainly you could see there's a bit of a problem here. That in Islam, for example, we would say that we're a sex-positive faith. And by that we mean that we don't look at intimacy itself as something dirty and shameful and bad, which is sort of how it's explained to a lot of Muslim youth to try to keep them away from it. Rather, we look at it as something that's a blessing and it's a gift and it's good, but there are boundaries for it. There's a place where it belongs. There's a wisdom behind these boundaries. And so you can imagine a lot of girls like her and many other people that I've met right here in California that were raised in a very similar fashion, that then all of a sudden they're supposed to get married and go off to marriage and what? Right? Oh, the rights of your spouse, and we have all these other things, and it's like, wait, I spent my whole life thinking these things were dirty and shameful and something the kuffar did, which already is a problem, isn't it? To teach like that something is wrong with people of other faiths just because of this isn't from Islam, right? But then now to get married, I felt so bad for her, but at the same time very grateful that at least she was learning about how the world really worked, and I had the opportunity to answer her question. But this might seem like a bit of an extreme example initially, but ultimately the fact that she had reached that age and thought these things were a reflection of somebody thinking that the best way to talk to their child as they grew up, her or anyone else, was to not only shove knowledge under the rug of an uncomfortable topic, but to actually ruin the topic completely with, ideas of it's haram and it's dirty and it's bad, just so we don't have to talk about it. Just so that maybe my kid won't be tempted to go in that direction. And I found through the years that when we're addressing challenging questions, sometimes parents panic and they worry. And so rather than looking at the wisdoms that Islam provides for us and the wisdoms that are within our deen of anything that you want to ask, people panic and they worry and they have these knee-jerk reactions, and there's either why are you asking this question? Who told you this? Where did you get this idea from? What are you watching? What are you listening to? Who are you hanging out with? We don't think like that. We're Muslims. Or maybe beyond that, we're Muslims is we're Pakistani, we're Indian, we're Egyptian, we're Bosnian, we're something, right? The cultural framework comes in. And so now the reaction has nothing to do with Islam even. It's what will the people say? You can't do this. You can't go out like that. You can't talk like this. What will so-and-so say? And so again, what's missing is actually bringing things back to Islam itself, right? Bringing things back to what is the beauty and the wisdom that Islam offers us. And so I kind of wanted to sort of begin with some frameworks that I felt might be helpful. And the first thing that I want to say is that I don't think I'm the most knowledgeable person in this room. I'm pretty sure many of you have far better responses to children and youth than I do in terms of knowledge. I don't say that I have the answer to every single question, obviously, that anybody's going to ask. What I have is just some experience that maybe some of you can benefit from when it comes to talking, whether it's to youth, whether it's to non-Muslims, whether it's to a family member, when they come with a challenging question. Because what I realized through the years was there were certain foundations within Islam that if you kind of keep coming back to them over and over again, the questions sort of come back again to that central part of Islam in which we'll find the wisdom. And the way that I like to look at this is whenever you're talking to someone, that has a question, the first thing that you have to know is that every question, if you can imagine, we have this ayah from the Quran, and hold firmly to the rope of Allah altogether and do not become divided. If you can think of all of these questions as threads to that bigger rope. So I try to think of my work sometimes as I'm definitely not the scholar, the sheikha, the teacher, the alima, but maybe I can be that person that has a couple threads, and I can give one of them to you, and that thread connects you back to the rope of Allah. And every question that someone is asking is one of those threads. And if we ignore the question, thread by thread by thread, that rope becomes weaker for the one that they're holding on to becomes weaker. So I think of these as threads, things that we give people to grasp onto. Because when someone has a question, I think personally one of the most damaging things to say is, that's an unnecessary question. Or, don't worry about this. Just focus on your 5 prayers a day. Have you mastered those yet? Are you a master of your salah? I didn't think so. So, you focus on the fard first, and then, we'll get to these questions later. But for someone who has a question, the problem is, if I ask you a question about something, you have no idea how big that is for me. Maybe for you, something about, why exactly do we have to make wudu up to our ankle? Like, what happens if we're just 1/4 of an inch too low? That might sound really silly to you. Like, why you just wipe it? What's your problem? Like, why are you worried about this? Just wipe, right? But to someone else, this might be a really big thing in their mind, because maybe you have this logically minded kid who's trying to understand things from a completely different angle than how your brain works, or a completely different angle of how your Iman is built. And so when you dismiss it, you're shutting down a very important part of them. You're saying your question's not worthy. You're ultimately saying you're stupid, even though it's not your intention. And if someone told you you're stupid and your question is dumb, how do you feel? And now that's a question about something connected to a sem. And that's where we create what we call spiritual wounds. They're the beginnings, the little scrapes, right? And so when people ask questions, please remember, you never know in their mind what this connects them to. How many threads you would connect them to if you just answered this one in a way that would help them put their heart at ease, or put their mind at ease, or connect them to something else that's going to enrich their Iman, enrich their knowledge. So the first thread, so to speak, that I would like to share. Let's see if I can. I was trying to visualize like all night last night how to draw these. So I'm going to actually work with a circle. We'll do the first one. The first one is, who created me? Who created you? There's an ayah in the Quran that says, of course I'm reading everything in English because that's my abilities here. Is not going to give you guys my Arabic. We'll be here all day. Or were they created by nothing? Or were they the creators themselves? Or did they create the heavens and the earth? Rather, they are not certain. Or have they depositories containing the provision of your Lord, or are they the controllers of them? The most important part of this ayah is, were they created by nothing, or were they the creators of themselves? This is what I call thread number 1. Every single person that I've ever spoken to who says they don't believe that there's a God, how do you know that there's God? How are you certain that there's a creator? How do you know that we didn't evolve from an explosion in space and become the humans we are? How are we certain that we weren't once monkeys? Don't you know the science that's out there? Haven't you heard of the theory, no keyword theory of evolution, the unproven theory, right? Every conversation I've ever had with someone, this single little sentence has really settled the conversation. Well, okay, like, did you come out of nothing? Did you make yourself? Well, obviously I didn't create myself, right? Okay, so what does that mean? And as you go through these questions with people, many Muslim youth, by the way, you know that atheism, for example, is one of the fastest spreading ideologies, for example, in Saudi Arabia. I have many reasons why I believe that's possible, But I thought I would just put that out there. Atheism is on the rise in the Muslim world. Like atheism, not even agnosticism. Agnosticism means that you know there's a God, but you're just not sure exactly which religion to follow, which belief system. But atheism is the idea that you think that there is no creator whatsoever. And I find this the most mind-boggling idea. Like, tell me that you don't know what to believe. Tell me that you've got a spiritual wound. Tell me that you grew up and your parents beat you in the name of a religion. I get that. I understand all of that, but really nothing? There's no creator. But when you come to something this foundational, and at the end of the day, you have kids in schools, and they're learning about the theory of evolution, and they're learning about science, and they're watching the ape man, and he comes upright, and all this crazy stuff, right? Which actually has its roots in a very racist ideology, if you don't know anything about it. But all of this, when you look at all of this, and you simply ask someone, but did you make yourself? Are you just nothing? There's no way someone can answer that with anything else. Tell me, okay, fine. Like, we exploded and on the space, right? Maybe we evolved from water, all that. That's okay, fine. I'll buy your theory, no problem. Does not say we don't have a creator. Now, I'm telling you guys this, and some of you are like, obviously, I know the answer to this, but that's kind of my point. These basic threads, like I said, these basic, simple, core ideas of Islam are not so basic to other people, including our kids. Because what we have been able to, I'm assuming all of us in this room are firm believers in our Creator, right? What we've been able to understand as adults, we assume that kids are just going to get, that they're just going to accept because we told them so. But the Quran itself invites us to think even more deeply on this matter. It addresses these kinds of questions because full-grown adults walking around on this earth, even those who were raised with some tenets of Islam in their life, have come to this position thinking there's just no God. And so what's that core first foundational piece is simply this: did you create yourself? And what's really fascinating about this, the reason why this has consistently been one of my favorite verses of the Quran, is because when people are going through really, really difficult times in their life, when they're really, really struggling, they're struggling with doubts. They're struggling with, why did God do this to me? They're struggling with, why is the world like this? They're just struggling. And they're at that edge where they're just not sure what they believe. This singular question of, okay, hold on. Let's just erase all of this for a second. Do you think that there's a creator that made you? Yes. That brings a person back to the most important belief that Islam has, which is from Tawheed, that there is one creator. We didn't name the creator yet. We didn't say anything else. Just, is there a creator? And of course, for Muslims, alhamdulillah, this one's great, because one of the names of Allah is the creator, Al-Khaliq, right? But talking to anyone, right? It's just, yeah, okay, I believe that there's a creator out there. Awesome. You've literally just established one of the most important foundational pieces for every question. Because that brings us to the second one. Can someone be my marker person? Who wants to be my drawing person? Can someone be my volunteer? Yeah. Can you just keep going? Like, we're going to make like sun rays, okay? All right, so number 2 is, why am I here? And just make another line. Yeah, okay. So if somebody asks that question, if you can get someone to say finally, yeah, okay, there's a God, right? The next logical question is, okay, so why am I here? Like, okay, I was made, but why am I here? Why are you here? And even asking all of you in this room, when I ask people this question, what is the meaning and purpose of your life? I say, don't give me the Saturday, Sunday school Muslim example. Don't tell me this off the top of your head. Tell me from your heart, why are you here? And it's really interesting, the answers that I get when I tell people, don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Tell me what your heart says. Because that is where your Iman is, right? But if a person can just, you get your kids, anyone, any family member, any friend, to say like, yes, there's a creator, okay. The next logical question person is, why did they make you? Why did they make you? Why are you here? And if you notice right now, we're being inquisitive. We're actually encouraging more questions, not less, right? Why are you here? Why do you think you're here? And what I love about the fact that someone can recognize they're created, which is a very important message, by the way, not just for us as adults, but for children, is it means that you matter. I don't know if you've ever seen, there's like this meme that goes around that says God looked at the world and decided it needed one of you. Have you ever heard this before? It's really sweet, right? But Allah decided that there needs to be you. That Allah made you specifically. And He fashioned you specifically. And He knows your name specifically. When I tell people that Allah knows your name, do you know what that does for people? Like, He knows you. And you matter, and you were made with purpose. There's a reason that you exist. Again, that alone right there, when you think of kids who are being neglected by their parents, being bullied at school, people that are having all kinds of emotional issues, just to know that, no, you really do matter, because not only is there a creator, but He made you specifically. And your name is known. He knows exactly who you are. And He knows exactly what you're going through. And you know what? There's a reason that you're here. And I often ask people, again, I'm talking to adults, by the way, but imagine if we could just raise our kids with these questions. I said, we know as Muslims that the reason we are here is to worship Allah. But why uniquely are you here? What unique talents, skills, abilities do you have that you will serve Him and humanity with? That's a much more personal question now. And to give kids the belief that, especially the ones that, don't really, like my eldest just applied for college, she's a senior in high school, my next one down's a sophomore, then I have a second grader and a 5-year-old, so I've got a whole span, right? Especially when you have, the teenagers that people are like, where are you going to college? What are you going to major in? What are you going to do? Like, that's the only thing adults ever ask teenagers, is like, so where are you going to college? What are you going to do? What are you going to major in? Which college are you going to? Where did you apply, right? And sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they're kind of freaked out. Sometimes they make up answers just to get us off their backs, right? But ultimately, it's to give them the belief that maybe you don't even know exactly what you want to do, but Allah has a plan for you. These foundational ideas are more threads to this rope. And Allah says in the Quran, who has created death and life, that He may test which of you is best indeed, and He is the Almighty, the oft forgiving. So now we have this next thread. There's a creator, and there's a reason you're here. There's a mission to fulfill. So what's the next logical thread after that? And that's, how do I live that purpose? Okay, that's number 3, right? The next 3. How do I live this purpose? So now I'm created. I'm here for a reason. Okay, I matter. What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? And again, bear with me, because some of you might be thinking, how is this answering tough questions? Bear with me. Right? Just bear with me as we kind of lay these foundational pieces again, this system. Every single prophet and messenger on earth, as we know, was sent to help answer this question. Not just who is your creator, not just why are you here, but how do you live? And throughout, the history of mankind, perhaps we could say that some of the day-to-day rulings have changed. Right? The Sharia, so to speak, isn't necessarily the same, with the Prophet ﷺ as it was in previous nations. The belief system has never changed, but maybe some of the day-to-day things have changed. But the central theme is there. But ultimately, that logical question of how am I supposed to live? Many questions, I think most questions our youth are asking will fall from this thread. Right? How am I supposed to live? What are the ways I'm supposed to live in this life? And from the Quran, it says that it is a guidance for mankind and clear evidence of guidance and discrimination between basically right and wrong. So we have this thread. So it's another piece of the foundation, okay? The 4th thread, the next question after that people are going to ask is maybe, so what about when I die? What happens to me now? Death, what's the 4th thread? Thanks. I'm almost done. There's only like 7 threads. I don't have 100. We live in a culture here in the West where, at least the way I grew up, I could safely say that death was something that's kind of sanitized. Western people don't like talking about death very much. They certainly don't like interacting with it. And by that I don't mean any of us like death, right? Nobody likes death, but how Muslims approach death is a very beautiful, much more organic way. We live with the understanding that we will leave. It's literally built into us. We live with that built into us. It's part of the foundations of how we actually live our lives. Time is limited, and it's not just about, I only have a limited time on earth, what legacy can I leave behind, and how am I going to build a name for myself? It's literally, I have a limited time and I know I'm going to die. The topic of death is very, very important. It's a very important one for kids to be in touch with and understand. And I think most of us that have ever been to a janazah can understand this, right? But especially when you're thinking of a teenager, for example, they're in the prime of their life, right? They're going to live forever. I know as a teenager, the last thing on my mind was ever that I'm going to die. That also is a reflection that I grew up very safe and very blessed, away from war and away from starvation and away from a lot of tragedies that many kids are growing up with, right? Those who are living in war-torn regions, I don't think teenagers feel like they're going to live forever quite the same. I think they're much more worried. But we are here, and alhamdulillah, here we have had a lot of stability, and your kids are having a lot of stability, and our community has had a lot more stability. So in general, they have that YOLO mentality, right? You only live once, so live it up. What are you going to do? But death is a really important thread, because it connects this concept of every single question people are asking, everything that I, Megan, struggles with in my own life. Ultimately, there's a resolution that can be found when you start to think of death. Because for the Muslim, again, this thread, right, is, well, what happens when you die? Well, what happens in the grave? Well, what happens when you're resurrected? Well, what exactly do we believe is going to happen? How do we get to paradise? And how do some people get into hellfire? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us from the hellfire. Again, this is a really important thread. These are foundational pieces of knowledge that help answer a lot of the questions people are struggling with, a lot of the internal conflicts that people are having. And we'll go through these examples in a little bit as we work through some of the questions. Number 5, who's my creator? So we addressed that there is a creator. This could have stayed with the same one, but I wanted to separate it a little bit. Who is my creator exactly? So we've accepted that, okay, I didn't make myself, so I know there's something out there. There's a creator, right? We've accepted the idea that there's a reason that I'm here, that I matter. We've accepted that there must be a way to live. We've accepted that we're not going to live forever. So if I'm going to die, tell me exactly who am I going back to? It's interesting that we ask kids to pray when they're young, like the Prophet ﷺ taught us. But kids, most of them, have no idea, not only who they're praying to, outside of the idea is Allah is the one that made you, but they have no idea what they're saying. So in our co-op recently, I have a co-op with my 5-year-old and 8-year-old and some little kids. And we always start our co-op reciting Fatiha together because it's just nice. Everyone sits together and the kids recite. And someone said, well, what does Ameen mean? Why do we say Ameen? I was like, well, it's like a way of asking Allah, like, can you answer like everything that we just asked of you? And I was trying to explain it to little kids. And my 5-year-old raised his little hand. He's like, but how can Allah answer your question when like we don't even know what we're asking him? And I was like, I know. I was like, thank you. That's a great question. So, I was like, that's great. Let's sit down. We talked about it. So I drew like a line in the carpet with my finger. You know how you can like put a line in the thick carpet? And I was like, okay, guys, this is Sirat al-Mustaqim. And I started to explain each line of Surah al-Fatiha, what it means, what we're saying, what we're asking, this conversation with Allah. And they were really fascinated, right? And Allah is merciful and He's kind and all these things. And what happens if you get off the straight path? And I drew these little curvy lines. And then I literally got up and explained to them the word Tawbah. That like Tawbah means you're going in the wrong direction. You stop, halt, turn around, and go back the other way. This is how it was explained, the meaning of Tawbah from Arabic to English, right? Literally to halt and turn back. And I'm like running in the carpet and turning around. And they're like giggling and laughing. But I'm trying to explain all of these concepts. But really, when you think about a lot of kids, when I worked with the youth that were, teenagers and high school students in my Sunday school, I said, we have failed them if they are this old and they have no idea what they're saying. Parents are like, you have to pray. Why aren't you praying? I'm like, try meditating in Japanese 5 times a day and tell me how committed you're going to feel to it. I know, this is an uncomfortable thing for me to say. People don't like it when I say these things. But I can tell you from talking to youth that then become adults. Some of them are still now in their 40s, by the way. They grow up. That people can't find the value in prayer because they don't know what they're doing in it. They don't know who their Creator is. If you don't know someone, how much love will you have for them? How much would you want to sacrifice for someone you don't know? And Allah isn't a someone. He's our Lord. But again, thinking of who exactly is the Creator. When non-Muslims come and ask me a question, and I'll just give you a quick example before we do these two other threads, and they say to me, how do you achieve salvation as a Muslim if you don't believe in Jesus as the Son of God? I care about you. I want you to go to heaven. I'm like, oh, that's great. Thank you. And it's like, so would you like me to answer that question? And so we start talking. And they're like, no, you don't understand. See, God loved the world so much. And they start preaching from the Bible that he gave his only son and he sacrificed him for your sins. I'm like, that's one way to explain love, but here's another way to explain love. Because we say that Allah is Al-Wadud. He's the most loving. We also say he's Al-Ghafur. He's the most forgiving. And I say to them, how about this? The very first moment that Adam and Eve made a mistake, God brought them near, taught them how to seek forgiveness, then forgave them. And then said, now you're going to spend some time on earth. And on earth, by the way, there's the shaitan, there's this devil. And he's going to try to tempt you, and he's going to try to take you away from the straight path. To me, when you think about putting a human on earth, that the most loving and beautiful thing that God did for all of humanity was teach us the nature of this life and how to succeed. I'm like, when your child does something wrong, don't we say it as mothers and as fathers, you should give unconditional love to your children, right? But unconditional love still comes with conditions, right? I can love you and I can care about you, but you can't be in my house doing drugs, right? I can care about you. I can even send you money for your rent, or I could send you, pay for your car insurance, but you can't live in my house and do X, Y, Z. There are conditions even to unconditional. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, we could say, is unconditional. Right? Allah is merciful to everyone on this planet. Whether they deserve it, they don't deserve it, Allah is merciful to everyone. We all have the same opportunities on this earth. We all have the same sun, we all have the same moon, right? The rivers don't belong to anyone, right? The oxygen we breathe in, Allah gives that to every single person on this earth. It's unconditional. But love has some conditions to it in terms of a relationship. So I say, to me, it's more beautiful that at the very beginning, he gave that gift of love, if we're going to use the word love, and he taught them how to forgive, and he let them go. So, I tell them, we don't have this idea that people are born in sin. We don't have this idea that when you look at a newborn baby, that people who are human beings look at and think, how precious, how pure. That is the natural response to anyone holding an infant. I think most of you have our parents, many of you have been around babies. You cannot look at this little child and think, what a shame, you're already tarnished. Right? That's not natural to a human being's heart. So I say, no, every single person's born completely free. And on top of that, especially if I'm talking to a woman, I'm sure you guys are aware, if you don't know, that the beliefs of Christianity originally taught that women specifically were the ones bearing the sin of original sin for all of humanity, that it was her fault because she tempted Adam. Apparently, Adam was too weak to stand up to her. And so they said that the reason women have pain in childbirth is as punishment. Look it up. It's not like something I'm making up. This is a teaching. Her pains in childbirth are part of her punishment for what Eve did. Wow. And we're talking about love. And I'm saying, but my God from the beginning said, I forgive you. And by the way, every time you make a mistake, if you ask, I will forgive you. Ask again, I will forgive you. I will forgive you. I will forgive you. In fact, all Allah asks of us, aside from believing in Him, is that when we make a mistake, we ask for forgiveness. Is that not profoundly beautiful? But there's a lot of kids that don't know that. Because there's a lot of Muslim kids that are raised to think But the moment they screw up, that's it. There is no way back. That they're tarnished forever. That they're bad forever. They don't know how to come back to Allah. So that's why I said that's another foundation. So thread number 6 is, who's the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So now we're getting to a question from speaking as Muslims, right? Who is our Prophet exactly? So again, we've established you didn't make yourself, right? You're here for a reason. You've got a purpose. You're finding out what happens when you die. You're asking who's this creator. Now we're saying that there's a final messenger. Well, who is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? I guarantee you that most Muslims, I almost feel like saying, but I don't want to go that far, but Muslim youth for sure do not know the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We tell them, say sallallahu alaihi wasallam when we say his name. You have to love him. You have to follow him. Why? Why should they love him? What do they need to know about him? And many of you are probably aware that there are certain things within the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam which are consistently at the surface these days. And as someone who spent many years working in dawah, and kind of missed the dawah table life, but alhamdulillah I have 4 kids and everything else, and many years talking with people, I spoke in churches, I've been at interfaith events, I did this for years. I can tell you that the questions are there's only like 10 questions that everybody pops up with, but those questions are now consistently on the tongues of our youth, and they want answers. And when we talk about not panicking, we talk about not worrying, we talk about wisdom, one of the reasons that parents often shun their kids, even if they don't mean to, is because they have not answered certain questions for themselves. You're uncomfortable with this question. You know what? I never thought about this question. I don't need to think about this question. Let me just focus again on those 5 prayers. Because on the day of judgment, Allah's not going to ask me about A, B, and C and how to answer. He's going to ask me about my prayers. Sounds like a fair justification, but I often say that your Iman is only as strong as the knowledge that you have. And if there's something that you can't answer, that's okay, but don't give up on it. I can tell you there are certain things I have spent 10 years looking for answers on, trying to understand. There's not many. There's just a few things, but I'm a really inquisitive person, and that's me personally. If I can't answer, if somebody asks me a question I can't answer, that's it. I'm done. I have to, I'm on a path until I feel at ease again. I find my teachers, I seek knowledge, I ask questions, I do research, because to me that's really important, to be able to answer a question, especially if it's coming from one of my own kids or someone that I'm close to. That's an obligation now. That's an obligation. If I can't answer it, that's okay. I asked my teenagers, by the way, what are the 2 things you think I should tell the parents? My 15-year-old son was like, just tell them it's okay to say I don't know. And I was like, that's a really good one, It's okay. I actually don't know, son, the answer to this question. I don't know the exact answer to this question, but we will find it together. Right? We will find it. Let's go ask the Imam after Jummah. Let's first look up online. Let's see what this, site that I rely on. Let's get the book off the shelf. Let's just look it up. Let's look up the hadith. Right? These are invitations. And I can tell you that I have this firm belief that our children are literally our spiritual growth invitations. Parenting is one of the scariest things I feel like I've ever signed up for 4 times now. Right? The responsibility of kids is huge. And is anyone in here a friend of mine on Facebook and have seen my baby chick story? Okay. So we just incubated chickens for one of our homeschool science projects. 6 of them out of the 12 hatched, alhamdulillah. So now I have 6 little peeping chicks that are adorable in a box. We're in love with them. We're holding them. I had to hair dry 3 of them because they wouldn't dry and they'll freeze to death. And so I'm taking care of these adorable little peeping chicks, and I'm madly in love with them and thinking just how cute they are. And they're so simple, and they just peep, and I taught them how to drink water. You have to take their beak and dip it first so they can find water, because they intuitively don't know how to find water. And you think about kids, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us these cute little babies, and he gives us this on-ramp. Right? At first it's feeding them and clothing them and changing their diapers and holding them, but then very quickly they grow, and rapidly they start asking really interesting questions. Sometimes sooner than we expected, sometimes before we felt like we were ready to answer them. And I consider every single one of those invitations to seek more knowledge, to elevate ourselves in what we can learn, to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the questions, again, remember what I said in the beginning? They might seem silly to you, but you never know how big that question is to someone else, or what it's a metaphor for in their lives. So we have that obligation. So teaching about the Prophet ﷺ, what was it like to be around him? When people ask me about the Prophet ﷺ's relationship with Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, it's really simple for me. I say, well, why don't we see what Aisha said about him? Because to me, having worked for 10 years now in a counseling field, having worked with women consistently who unfortunately have been in abusive relationships, I can tell you when they get out, they talk. They tell you what happened. They tell everyone. When they're finally free, when they finally have the chance to get away, they will tell you what happened. I said, but let's look at Aisha. I actually did an entire marriage course just on Aisha and the Prophet ﷺ's relationship. Because what she has to say about him is so beautiful and so profound and so meaningful. You know, I tell them at the very end when the Prophet ﷺ is passing away, he asked to be with her. And she's sitting there with him on her chest and she's brushing his teeth. And when he makes the final statement where she hears the Prophet ﷺ saying, to the highest companions, like she's hearing him utter this phrase, to the highest companions. He's being asked, like, where do you want to go? And Aisha says, he's not choosing us. Like she hears the Prophet ﷺ speaking and she's saying he's not choosing us. Like she knows this is his final moment, he's choosing to leave. And she's with him to the very end in love and dedication and caring for him in every possible way. And spent the rest of her life speaking about him and smiling about him. You know, it's like the narration where she describes that the Prophet ﷺ used to kiss some of his wives while fasting, and they said, and she smiled, right? That smile that kind of betrays which wife she's talking about. I mean, who knows which wives he was, kissing during fasting, but the fact that she smiles and kind of betrays herself in that sense, she's kind of revealing it's her. All of these things, they tell us who the Prophet ﷺ was. In the most intimate, private space, there are no cameras, there's no paparazzi at that time, there's no secret recordings. We have a woman who lived with him in the most private sphere. When he is gone, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she's telling us over and over about him. But if you don't know these stories, if our kids don't know these kinds of things, what examples do they have when their non-Muslim classmates ask them questions? Right, how do we address it? And the final thread is, what is my essence as a human being? So that's number 7. Where's my marker person? Thanks. So what is my essence? You can just write that down. How are we doing up here? Okay. I have no idea if his handwriting's legible. I hope it is. I'm not looking. Okay. So what is my essence, huh? What is my essence? Yeah. ESSENCE? I think. I don't have a red line. So what is my essence? This is the final foundational piece, okay? And what that means is, what am I exactly as a person? Like, what am I? How are men and women equal in front of Allah? Are men and women equal in front of Allah? Am I tainted with sin, the moment that I'm born, before that I'm born? Is my nature inherently evil? Right? What is our essence? Being able to understand the core of a person. So like I gave that example of just talking with Christians, for example, for them to understand that not only do we see this pristine little cute baby, but we also believe that every soul comes into this world pure and untainted. And that children, what a beautiful thing we have, by the way, that children are not accountable until the age of accountability. But that every good deed our kids do stays on their record. And anything they do before the age of accountability is completely erased. That's like starting with bonus points. Kids really like that. It's like, especially if they go to school and they understand like extra credit, and like they get a leg up on extra credit and bonus points. Every good thing that you help your kids do and you encourage them to do, alhamdulillah, that stays with them. So we have a beautiful essence of what it means to be a human being. Islam is very beautiful, and its descriptions and understandings of what it means to be a person. It's a very dignified description of what it means to be human. And then, of course, after this is the question of many things. Well, how do we become evil? Why is evil something that, how do we become this way? Or why do people do these things? Why do bad things happen to good people? But coming back to the essence of a person. And part of the essence is understanding when people say things like, I was molested as a child, I was sexually abused. I hear this consistently. When people talk about going through trauma, they themselves feel like they are forever tainted. They themselves carry this trauma that leads them to believe that they are a shameful person. It's a very painful thing to hear people describe, that they feel like they don't deserve much in life because of what they went through. They feel like they don't deserve that much because of what someone did to them. Or you have a person who's made really poor choices in their life. They didn't follow the straight path. They didn't do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked of them. And again, now they feel they are forever a bad person. The beauty again of Islam, the message to all people is, first of all, if someone did something to you, this doesn't change your soul. It doesn't change your essence. That's so healing for so many people, I cannot tell you. Like, you are still who you are. Like, who you are is not this body. Who you are is the soul Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put inside of you. This is our shell, right? This shell that's getting older and older, this is our shell. This is our blessed body, and we use it for the sake of Allah, but it's not who we are. So what's done to the body isn't the same as what's done to the actual essence of a person. That is amazing. And on top of that, for the person who's done something wrong, again, we tell them, like we said earlier, tawbah. You come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with sincere tawbah, you right your wrongs, Allah can erase those things. You're not that person anymore. Again, we talked about earlier about the love of Allah. How much more loving again is that? You're not that person anymore. That's why we say when people come into Islam, whatever came before is erased. It's gone. Because saying shahada is like the ultimate tawbah, right? It's like not only are you affirming the oneness of Allah and the Prophet as his messenger, but you're ultimately saying like everything before was wrong and you're completely going in a different direction, right? That is the ultimate like tawbah, right? So you're turning to Allah completely. So Allah erases all of those things. Your essence is pure again. And then we talk about these things like every time you make wudu, right? Sins fall off. Every time a person goes for like Umrah and Hajj, right? They're completely erased and returned to this essence. So understanding the essence of a person is also crucial in how we're going to answer questions. Because when we think about people that choose certain lifestyles, some people treat them as if their essence is shameful. Their essence is evil. But their essence, it's ultimately, like they're the creation of Allah. And at any moment, a person can say, Allah forgive me, and they are now way above the rest of us. So it's important to differentiate in the idea of what it means to be a human. The ideas of male and female. I mean, we're in the era of the very strong feminist movement. A feminist movement that has derailed from the original one. The original one being a huge necessity for this country, and a huge necessity perhaps for other countries in the world, and perhaps some of it needed still yet today in terms of some of its ideas. And so we have Muslims today still saying, like, why do I go to the masjid and we're treated differently because we're female? Why do we have different rules? Why does God favor men? This is an essence question, aside from a million other things. But it's an essence question. I often have to tell people that God's not on the side of your father or your husband just because he's male. Because a lot of women believe that, unfortunately. You know, someone recently told me about her father who beat her entire childhood. And they lived apart for a number of years. They're living, and then they came back to living together again. And everyone in the family is like, you need to kiss your father's feet. You need to forgive him. You need to be kind to him. You need to talk to him. And everyone, he's your path to Jannah. He brought you into this world. How dare you not love him and respect him and sit with him and kiss his hands and kiss his feet? And if you don't do that, beware of the dua of the parent because he can send you to hell. He's your dad. He has that much power. And I told her, no, this is not right. I said, this is not right. Allah doesn't just favor your dad because he's your dad. Right? He beat your entire childhood. He's done a grave wrong. It would kind of make sense that you don't really want to talk with him every day and sit down and chat with him. But it's interesting how in Muslim culture we tend to favor the aggressor and we completely ignore the victim. And that victim has I see a lot of heads nodding, you guys understand, right? The victim, I'll tell you something, just an inside point, because are there Muslim kids going through this stuff? Absolutely. When a person deals with abuse, by the way, the hardest thing is when the belief system is the only way through is back to the abuser. The abuser is your salvation. So you know what happens? I don't even have Allah to turn to anymore. What happens when you feel Allah is on the side of the person who's harming you? You don't even have Him. So do you think you keep praying? Maybe. In fact, I consider it a beautiful miracle when I find people in fervent dua. They have not turned from Allah, but they're in so much pain. They're saying, Allah, forgive me that, I'm not being with my husband because, he beat me yesterday. Please, Allah, don't be angry with me. Please, they're begging Allah, don't be angry with them, because no one's told them, again, no one has shown them the mercy that Islam actually has. These are essence questions, and they are big. All right? So these are the 7 threads. Now, this is sort of my foundation, sort of the system, if you will, of how I've kind of filtered the questions that I fielded through the years, from teenagers, from adults, from non-Muslims. So what I'd like to hear from you guys is sort of what are some of the things that maybe growing up, some of your friends were asking, or maybe questions that your kids have asked, or your students have asked, or people in a halaqah you lead have asked, things that you've heard other parents struggling with. Who can give me an example of a challenging question? And let's see, this may be a royal fail, by the way, but let's see if one of these 7 sections is going to be the place we need to connect someone back to, or who has just an example. Pick one. Yes. Yeah. 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 Are you a teacher? No? Okay, I was just because you said some of the youth, so I was curious if oh, okay. That's a really, really, really good question. And in fact, for many people, so now we're going to get to some of where I'm going to go with this. Sometimes we feel like the answer to every question is just a purely theological response. I really wish I had that person, because I'd be saying, what's leading you to ask that question? Because a lot of times what's beneath that question is the lifestyle of being Muslim is hard, or I feel like I can't be myself. I feel like I'm being oppressed being a Muslim. I feel like I can't actualize myself or my potential or my being because of the rules, because we're talking about youth. So it's like, I didn't even ask to be here, right? Have any of you ever heard, you do something for your kids, and then you're like, well, why can't you, can you guys at least help clean up? They're like, well, we didn't ask to make this craft project. This was your idea, kids will do things like this, right? I didn't ask for us to make popcorn. Why do I have to clean up off the floor? And so it's sort of like this ingratitude, right? It's ingratitude. And part of that is not being able to see how precious life is. They don't recognize how precious life is, and it makes me wonder how precious they believe their life actually is. Because when you feel love with someone, you have a beautiful moment of connection. You look at your children's eyes and you have that moment when they're sleeping or when they're giggling, right? When we experience the miraculousness of life, we are grateful for being alive. Even sidestepping, so I'm sidestepping the question for a second, right? We are grateful for life. We are alhamdulillah, thank you Allah for my spouse, for my kids, for this friend, for this community, this moment, this whatever, right? We feel it. So for kids, part of the challenge at times is they're young, and we wonder, what life are they living? What's their experiences like? Are they able to appreciate being alive? But if they feel like being Muslim is a bunch of rules, and it's I didn't even ask to be created. I don't why I'm here, I'm stuck here, now I got to do all this stuff. So I try to look at the question beneath the question, right? You're right. And sometimes you're right. You didn't ask to be created. Now we go to the first thread. But you were created, right? Yes. So now we go to the second thread. So why do you think you're here? that will make them pause. And it may sound like, again, I didn't answer the question, but my experience is often, well, you're here, right? Yes. Why do you think Allah made you? Now we're getting more personal. So that takes us to that second thread. I don't know, because He wants us to worship Him, right? It's kind of the common like teenager shrug, right? But why did He make you to do that? So we're getting more personal. Part of our challenge, again, sometimes when we answer questions is we do them purely intellectual and theological. We forget we're talking to a person with feelings, with fears, with needs. And so getting more personal to a person helps them start to think differently. I don't know. Tell me, what are you good at? What do you like to do? The more you start to expand their ability to connect themselves to life, they start to recognize that they have a purpose. They specifically, you Abdullah, you Fatima, have a reason to be here. I have found that question will shift. So it's kind of looking at what's really beneath this question. Not just the theological, like, well, because Allah created you and why, and did He want to be known? Is it, like, Allahu A'lam, right? We could try to answer this, but I tell you, it will not suffice them. So instead, what's the question beneath the question? What do you think? Absolutely. And again, like, most questions have another question beneath them. And so that's when I said, like, how to respond without worry, but rather with wisdom, is to kind of be able to slow down, right? And sometimes not to just react. It's like, what do you mean? Astaghfirullah, don't say something like that. Allah made you and you're here to worship Him. So, that tends to be a lot of people's response, an angry, fearful response. So what's the real question you're asking? Why are you here? Why did He make you? I don't know. What do you think? What are you good at? Why might your life be meaningful? Why do you think you matter to Allah? What a beautiful way to start thinking now, right? Because now it really opens up the heart, and we're getting a little bit out of the mind, and we're engaging with a different part of the person. So that's where I would go with that. Yeah, who's got another one? Yes. Please, yes, and by the way, if anyone has, yes, please do add. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm. Mm-hmm. Which thread did you just connect us to? Now you're going to read your own writing at least, right? So yeah, and you also mentioned if they don't know the creator and they only know their parents. So we also have who's my creator. So you guys see where I'm going here. That's another really great perspective to that. Does anyone else have something to add to someone saying, I didn't ask to be here? Anyone else have anything else? Okay, all right. Who has another question? Thank you so much. Yes? Why is He what? Sorry, I couldn't hear the last part. Sorry. Why does Allah control everything? You said it's of your 4-year-old. Okay. So with little kids, let me ask you first. How did you answer your 4-year-old? So your 4-year-old is saying Allah is so big and so powerful. Why does He control our sustenance? Why is He so big and so powerful? That's a really great question. So here's something about really young kids. With really little kids, we have to remember their age and their development. And sometimes it's a simple answer. Because Allah's the most powerful. That's one of His attributes. Allah is powerful. Well, how did He get that way? Like, that's who He is. Right? And so a little kid, sometimes their questions aren't that deep. That's what I mean, like, not panic. They're not like philosophy, they're like deep into philosophy, They're little. And so little kids are just trying to understand, like, for a long time, One of my kids, when they were little, they think, a lot of little kids think Allah is a person. They think Allah is a person. They have no way of understanding, like, who is Allah and where is Allah, and that we're talking to Allah. Like, they have no way to conceive of a being that's not us. And so that's part of the idea, is understanding that mind of that little kid, is how to, like, they know superheroes and they know, like, strong and, like, eat your veggies and whatever. Like, how did Allah get so powerful? How can he control so many things? So simple answers for little kids. Like, oh, well, that's one of the ways, that's one of the natures of Allah, is that he is just the most powerful. Did you also know he's the most gentle? Right? And just teaching them about the attributes, but not to go, like, too deep into it. As they get older, one of the things that I've always told parents is it's okay to withhold some information as when kids are little, because they're not going to understand, right? So a common question for little girls is like, well, how come mommy has to wear hijab? Like, why do you have to cover, right? You're not going to sit a 6-year-old and be like, let me tell you about the birds and the bees and boys and girls, and, like, and that's not even, like, the first reason why we cover anyway, right? But, like, whoa, over information, right? But that's what happens. Right? I know a lot of women, that's why they were told, oh, because you can't trust men. They're like 6. I'm like, what are you saying? And they'll go into, like, details. I'm like, right? Oh, because Allah says that he wants, when we go out in public, for anyone who sees me to know that I'm a believing woman of him. Oh, right? Is there a second set of wisdom behind the modesty between all of us? Of course there is. They don't need to know it when they're 6, right? So there's also the understanding that just like the rest of us, we learn, right? We keep adding layers. You guys remember being teenagers, right? Right? I remember being a teenager, right? So layers. That as they get older, and sometimes I've even told my kids, you know what? I'll tell you when you're older. And they're like, when? When you're 12. And they will remember when they are 12, by the way. They will tell you, said when I'm 12, you will tell me this, right? And it's sometimes I said, you know what, I don't think I can explain it to you yet, but when you're older, I will tell you. I will explain certain things when you're a little bit older, right? So everyone has a different view on parenting, and how to answer things and what to say and when to say. That's for each parent to decide. But certain things, it's also okay to delay on certain things until they're older. They're old enough to understand. So again, you don't, like, traumatize your kid with information that they're too young to understand. Right? So that's part of that hikmah, that wisdom of knowing the times and the layers that we teach kids as they grow older. Right? So something very simple. Again, little kids are looking at the material world in front of them, and they're just trying to understand it. Very simple answers. And they'll be like, okay. And he'll come back again when he's 8 and be like, I have another question. But very simple when they're little. Okay? You feel content with that? Yeah? Okay. All right. Another one. Another example. Yes. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Mm. So how do you answer it so far? Right. Mm. What's a really profound thought was the idea that if Shaitan wanted to make Tawbah, he can. He can. Shaitan could make Tawbah. Shaitan could choose to be of the jinn that worships Allah correctly. Yes or no? He could. He chooses not to. And that's really important for everyone to understand. Shaitan is not, like growing up for me, the presentation of the devil was that he is like the arch enemy of God. Okay, so you have the little Disney cartoons I used to grow up with, there was like the little angel on the right and the little devil on the left, if anyone grew up with Disney, okay? And this idea that you'd have the good angel fighting with the bad angel, or you would have God and his arch enemy basically is the devil, and that they're at war with each other. Kind of takes you back to like Greek mythology and a lot of other traditions. This idea that there's, Hades, the god of the underworld, and I don't remember what Zeus, is it Zeus? Okay, whatever. On the upper world, right? So, you have these like, they're enemies. They're equally powerful, right? So it's like all the superhero stories, right? You have the good guy and the bad guy, and they're all constantly at war with each other. Harry Potter and Voldemort, right? And this is often the presentation in general that people have of the devil. And I remember someone asking me once, why doesn't God just stop the devil if he's so powerful? Because it implies, the fact that Shaitan exists implies that God is too weak to stop him. Right? Again, this is my upbringing, this is my experience, this is my cultural experience of growing up in America. The people believe that the devil is powerful. That's why, aside from just being like misguided, there is an underlying feeling in the culture that those who could tap into that devilish side tap into power. Do you guys know what I'm saying? Evil is powerful, is it not? Evil is a very powerful force. And the temptation to it is there for every human being, right? That temptation to have that little bit more power. The fantasy world of storybooks, of magic, and all of these things, while they've been balanced out in stories like Harry Potter with good does defeat evil, and the characters actually have moral value and whatever, there's this temptation to the evil side, to the dark side, to be able to do more. There's a belief that one could sort of circumvent God. That's Satan worship, right? Like we align ourselves with him, we'll have power. And is that not actually what Satan tells all of us? If we disobey Allah, we'll have a little bit more of something we wish we could have that by obeying him we cannot have. That literally is his trap. That was also his trap for who in the beginning? What did he promise Adam and Hawa if they would eat from the tree? Who can tell me? Have incredible knowledge, all of these things, right? The Christians have a version, the Muslims have a version. Everybody has a different version of this idea, but ultimately Shaitan's promising them something that by being good, quote unquote, you could get. Right? It's always like this. But I think when we're talking to kids, helping them understand that even Shaitan could choose to be good tomorrow. The world leaders you don't like in the world today, the ones that people make dua against, I'm like, make dua for them first, then maybe against, all right? They too could become the best human being tomorrow. Umar ibn al-Khattab became one of the best. Khalid ibn Walid became one of the best. Hind became one of the best. We have examples. Islam is transformative, right? Goodness transforms, but it's a choice. So helping them understand that we don't have a belief system, which some people carry. How are we doing on time? That God created the world and now he just sits back. They call it the old man in the sky. There's cartoons of a man with the beard. That he just sits back and watches this chaos and then punishes everybody who does it wrong. We don't have that belief. And it's really important that we as adults understand this, or we won't be able to give this confidence to our kids. Allah is all powerful, and he threatens in the Quran all the time. Do you see the nations before? He can just wipe them off the face of the earth. He can turn the earth upside down on them. This isn't a problem, right? But Allah gives us choice and time, and Shaitan, his clock is ticking too. And I think that, again, like there's some of these like essence questions, right? So I feel like these are, knowing that Shaitan could turn anytime, that we don't believe that he was inherently evil, right? We don't believe that he was created evil. He was not. He was in Jannah. He had immense knowledge, but he turned. And he turned by arrogance. He turned out of jealousy. He turned by his own choice, and he's never turned back to this day. Much like some human beings. May Allah protect us, and may Allah protect our kids. So I hope that gives you some direction. And when kids find that out, they're like, wait, Shaitan can make tawbah? I'm like, yeah, and Allah would forgive him, despite all the bad he's done, right? That he too can turn back. So what does that mean? We come back to, what does that mean about us? So it's... again. Yeah, I mean, he's part of the test, and he's part of the system. But Allah gave him the same knowledge as Adam and Hawa. Like, he knows all of us can turn back. Allah promises, like, the true believers, like, he's not going to be able to touch us, right? But he's always there, and they're all whispering, right? And we have our own inclinations. But it is fascinating to really think that the things Shaitan promises all of us are always things we think we can get that we can't get by being good. So, yeah. Okay, so we have time for a few more questions. Who's got one? Yes. Yeah. How much what? Do you have an example? Or just general? So that's what I meant earlier about like not dismissing a question, but answering it. Like there are some questions that you can delay the answer for. In my opinion, this is just Megan's personal opinion. But no question should be dismissed. And there's a big difference. Because you say, oh, you're too young for these kinds of things. It's kind of like this, go away, be a kid. But Ali became Muslim at what age? He was 9. He was a little boy, right? And little kids have big minds, and they think, and they're very critical thinkers. But there is maturity, of course, and of course, his time period, and grew up around the Prophet, so we've got some differences here in terms of maturity. But maturity matters in, I think, sometimes the details, but we don't overload them. But I don't think you ever dismiss a question, but you can delay a response if you feel that it's really necessary, you know? Yes. Yeah. Right. It's really hard to look anyone in the eye that is telling you about something awful that they've gone through and say, Allah wanted this for you. It's hard. And I remember I learned a lesson years ago about responding with compassion and empathy instead of intellect in this. I was at an interfaith gathering a long time ago. And the topic of children dying came up, and I was sitting with, I think, a Jewish woman and a Christian woman and a Baha'i woman, and we were talking, and I said, well, in Islam, we believe that children that die, they go straight to paradise, and, so there's that ease for the parents, that, and this woman looked at me and she said, try looking someone in the eye whose child just died and saying that to them. And her answer really took me aback, and I never forgot that moment because I realized I must have been coming across as just like a little, I'm just, this is what we believe, person. I must not have been connected to the conversation. I must not have been connected to my heart. I really didn't do a good job because that was her, it was a very, not mean response, but it was a very, like a cold gust of wind hit me upside the head. And I never forgot that moment because I realized that when we answer questions, we have to pause and first really connect with the person. So if you notice each question you've asked, I'm like, we have to do something else. Because again, we're dealing with a human. But when they're truly asking, and I have worked with people in this situation over and over and over and over and over again. Why is it, somebody said to me, why is it that people that do drugs get pregnant and have kids? And I have been a believing woman my whole life, and I've done everything right, and I can't get pregnant. Why does Allah give children to people who beat their kids? And I would never do that, and He won't give me one. That people go through heartbreak, Why is there war? Why is there suffering? Why is there starvation? Why is there rape? Why is there abuse? Why is all of this here? But when you're working with a person, what I know is that it's okay to not be able to give them the right answer as to why it has happened. But what you do have to believe in that space is that there is a meaning behind it. I don't know what the meaning is, but I know there is one. That has been one of the most transformational things I have seen help people. It's sort of similar to like when someone's going through grief, that the best thing you can do is just be there for them, not try to make it okay, not try to shove religious ideas down their throat to make them not cry, right? To just be with them. That the crying is there, their sadness is there. We don't have to fix it. So when someone has asked, why would Allah do this to me? I hold a space and I say, I don't have the answer for you, but I know that there's a meaning for you in this. And as hard as it is, we're restoring the confidence to people that their life has meaning, even in the pain. Now, as adults, if we've lived a little bit, we can look back and we often recognize that our hardest moments had some of the greatest blessings for our transformations, right? They become the things that strengthen our Iman. They're the reason we became more religious. They're the things that helped us become better people. But not everyone's at that place. But holding a space and saying, I don't know why you're going through this, but I know that there's a purpose and a meaning, is holding on to a thread for them. Because that thread connects them back to because who is Allah? And Allah loves His servants. And Allah wants good for humanity. And it's holding that belief for them in your heart while they work through all of the pain to hopefully arrive back at the same conclusion. But it's an important one because if you talk, my personal experience for almost anyone I've ever spoken to who's an atheist, or someone who says they're no longer Muslim, or someone who says I'm pretty much on my way out the door of Islam, almost all of them have an emotional pain that they cannot rectify in their life, and as a result they are doubting whether it's that there's God or they're doubting the religious system that they're from. Muslims too. And so by restoring the belief that there is meaning even in suffering, we're opening again a new door for how they think. And that's an important one. If you just tell someone, you know, everything that's for the believer is good, you know, the prick of a finger, you lose sins, and if you're patient, it's good for you. These things are valuable. These hadith are valuable. These reminders are valuable. In fact, I found when working with Muslims, for most people, that ayah or that hadith is like all they need to remind them again. But if a person you feel their Iman is rocky, or you're working with a young person whose Iman is still not quite solid, they're still developing, that space of, I don't know why you're going through this, but I know there's a meaning for you. And I know that you're going to grow and learn from this. But right now, what do you need? Well, my parents are abusive, right? Or, you know, I'm getting bullied at school. How do we address what they're going through? What's the obligation on us as parents or a community or as teachers or as mentors or as friends or family members? What do we need to do? Because part of being Muslim is removing someone from an oppressive situation if they're currently in it. Part of being Muslim, if you know someone went through something, is figuring out what do they need to heal? What do we need to do to help you move forward? We are part of those threads. We are part of keeping people on this path. So that's how I personally have addressed that. So yes, reminding people that everything that happens has a purpose and a reason, that every single thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put us through has a wisdom. But again, the person you're talking to, it's really figuring out where are they at right now, so that we don't feel like another person giving them a textbook answer and pushing them away. Does that make sense? So if you notice, there's like a theme coming up here over and over again in my responses. What's the theme you're hearing from me? Yes. Yes. Hmm. Oh, wow. MashaAllah. So what was your lesson you would like us to take from that in terms of the hardship? Okay. That's a good one, because that's a really insightful response, that people feel like everything that's happening to them is punishment. Allah must hate me, right? And that goes back to my essence point again, right? Like, Allah doesn't hate you because you're going through a hard time. Allah doesn't hate. In fact, I will say, when talking to young adults of any kind, for me, one of the most beautiful things I have found in the life of the Prophet ﷺ is the fact that he, and if not he, everyone around him went through every single human tragedy I know of. There isn't one. Would it be fair, you know how, the Prophet ﷺ was asked, like, why didn't Allah send down an angel? Would you really be able to follow a being that experiences nothing like you? Nothing like you at all. But yet, the Prophet ﷺ went through every kind of pain. And I can say that when you tell someone, because that same person asked me, and I hear all the time, why would Allah do this to me? I did everything right. I prayed, or I didn't disobey Allah, or I changed my life. I've done everything. Why is Allah doing this to me? We say that when Allah loves someone, He tests them, right? But if you give them examples and you say, well, remember that the Prophet ﷺ saw family members be killed, that his sons died and he buried them. Do you know, by the way, that he spent months in his home where Aisha said that a fire was never lit because they were so hungry. They ate like dates and water for months on end. And you just keep going. And the Prophet ﷺ, do you know how big his house was, by the way? And do you know about the time he hid in the cave? And you just keep going. And then we could do the story of Bilal. And we can just, that we could just keep going and tell story after story after story. The best of the best of the best of humanity went through every tragedy there is. So no, Allah doesn't hate you. Allah is not disregarding you. And that also is a beautiful way to bring someone back, because now you've connected their pain to the Prophet ﷺ. And I've always said, I've imagined in my life, there were times in my life where, especially when I was a newer Muslim, there was one holiday where I went home. It was really a rough time for me, and with my family. And I happened to have borrowed a book, the Sealed Nectar. It's like the classic Sira book everybody had. A friend in college loaned it to me. And I was sitting in my room and I was just crying, and I just ripped open a page. I'm going to read through this book. And I just started reading about the Prophet ﷺ's experience with his family, trying to tell them about Islam. And of course, we all know about what the Prophet ﷺ's family did to him, right? And his uncles and the people that were, conspiring to kill him and murder him. Again. And I found so much in that moment. Which thread are we on? Which one? Who's the Prophet? Who's Muhammad ﷺ, right? Who's the Prophet? I found so much comfort. And I thought, if I could talk to him today, I know he would know exactly what to say to me. So again, when we're working with young people or adults, family members, friends, ultimately you can see all of these threads again. The goal is to bring them back to some knowledge. And if you also know, there's a common theme here, and it's perfect that we're in the Institute of Knowledge, that we have to educate ourselves and never stop learning. But as parents, again, the obligation on us is, if you don't know the answer, then find the answer. It's totally fine to tell your kid, you know what, I have no idea, I'm going to ask somebody. Sometimes kids don't want anyone to know you're asking because they might be embarrassed. And some kids are like, yeah, let's go ask Sheikh or so-and-so, right? But it's okay not to know. But the most important thing is that you take seriously their questions, and you take seriously that they are human beings, and they will be struggling their whole life just like we're struggling. But the goal is, make sure they have the threads and come back to these common things, and you'll find that most questions eventually will water down to the things that the Quran itself addresses. So I think with that, we are wrapping up. Thank you so much, you guys, for being here and giving me the opportunity to talk to all of you. I'm on to the youth after this and figure out what's on their mind. So jazakumullah khair. Thank you. She's wonderful, by the way. She's wonderful.